All right, welcome back to Knowledge in Progress. Today we are going to continue our investigation into the earliest evidence that we have for humans making music. Last week we started answering this question. We looked at some sources regarding the potential value of music to ancient humans. We looked at some archaeological evidence for musical instruments, and we saw some indication of anatomical features that would have allowed humans to begin making sounds that probably resemble today's singing, although we have no evidence that they actually used their anatomy in that way. I'm going to bring us over here to our Knowledge in Progress vault. We can see that we have a bit of a graph of our investigations. This was our first investigation when we were looking at the impact of biodiversity on ecosystem stability. And this one here is where we've started investigating the earliest evidence for music. We can click on this node and enter our investigation. Remember that we started off with two lines, right? We have archaeological evidence, right? This is going to be anything that allows us to find artifacts, historical artifacts, such as instruments or images of instruments. If we can see a cave painting of someone playing an instrument, that would be a good indication that we were making music. There's also a potential evolutionary line, right? What are the oldest anatomical structures that allow humming or singing? Last time we started investigating some of these sources, we found a few books that looked like they would be interesting that we had to interlibrary loan. And I have good news on that front. I got an email today saying that they were available for me to pick up. So while we won't be able to look at them tonight, we should be able to investigate them next episode. In the meantime, we're going to continue down our Google Scholar search. We're going to find scientific papers providing some evidence. We were working on a particular source. Let's see if we can find that. It wasn't this one. There we go. All right, so this is the source we were working on last time. How music and instruments began, a brief overview of the origin and entire development of music from its earliest stages. We found a lot of interesting claims here, right? We found something about music, or at least the ability to produce musical sounds, probably predated speech, so we could have been singing before we were speaking, and maybe that singing communicated something and evolved into speech. We also have pretty good reasons to think that rhythm likely preceded melody. It doesn't take as much anatomical evolution to maintain a rhythm. We did get some claims that primates other than humans today have a very hard time maintaining rhythms for long periods of time. So that's not something that is universal, but it is probably easier to evolve than the ability to maintain a melody. We talked about some of the potential purposes for music. We looked at dance, we looked at ritual, entertainment, and social cohesion. And then we got some evidence of the origins of music. We think that it's likely that Homo erectus was probably the first species that could make controlled musical sounds, and it's very likely that more recent species of Homo, so Heidelbergensis, Neanderthalensis, Sapiens, can sing every bit as well as we can today. I would like to today try to find some evidence for this particular claim. So that would place the origin of vocalization, so musicality, at potentially about 1 million years ago. Of course, we don't know if they use those anatomical features in that way to create music. We had a bit of a discussion about rhythm and the role that rhythm plays, right? Maybe we had humans working together on tasks, and it turns out that when people are working on a task together, they fall into a rhythm. And when they vocalize while they're working, they vocalize in time to that rhythm. So it's possible that music and dance came out of that type of effect. And then we got some archaeological evidence. One thing that turned up repeatedly last week is that older archaeological evidence probably degraded. Earliest instruments were probably made out of wood or other vegetable material, maybe animal skins for drums, and they decompose really easily. So the oldest instruments that we're likely to get evidence for are the ones made out of bone. Right, so we have bone flutes and we have ivory flutes that range back about 40,000 years. We had a claim that these were very well developed already, so that we can probably assume that we've been making instruments out of other materials for quite a while before they started making them out of bone. We have some really old whistles, potentially dating back some 60,000 years, but it's possible that that is just a bare leg bone and it has some holes in it because something chewed on it, and if you blow on it in the right way, it makes some sounds. So that could be coincidence. The two oldest whistles that we've been able to date reliably are about 50,000 years ago. And these were made from reindeer toe bones, which, again, very interesting material. Looking at some of our other evidence for music, we found a conch trumpet dating back some 20,000 years. We've got mammoth bones that were modified into percussion instruments. Those look like they also were about 20,000 years old. So we've got a good bit of evidence archaeologically here. We also talked about string instruments. We find evidence of arrowheads for hunting back in the Mesolithic, and it's generally assumed that whenever you have hunting bows, you're also going to have musical bows, which are the ancestor to most of our stringed instruments. The simplest form of that, you essentially bite the end of the bow between your teeth, you use your mouth as a resonating chamber, and then you can hammer on the string with a stick, the thought being that that was probably an arrow of some sort. So we haven't actually found musical bows, mostly because they're made out of wood and they're going to degrade, but we have found arrowheads and we can assume that musical bows developed around the same time. So that's where we left off last time. What I would really like to do is find a paper on this really old bear femur, and potentially these old whistles. I think that's going to give us the most reliable ancient evidence of musical instruments that we can find. And then I would like to see if we can locate some sources related to that anatomical development. So let's pull up this source and see what they cite for that bear femur. Jump over to Google Scholar here. Get our PDF. And we want to know femur. All right. So this is going to be our oldest evidence. And do we cite any sources? We have Turk 2014. That seems to be the source they're citing here. They say this is a more recent publication about that bone. So let's see what Turk 2014 has to say, if we can find that. So we go back down to our reference section. This may be a problem because I don't read Ukrainian, but it probably has... Actually, this is Slovenia. Slovenia. I don't know what language this is. But let's see if we can copy this citation into Google Scholar. All right, that's not going... Yeah, so that's Slovenian, and we don't have access to it. So let's try a different approach. Archaeology, bear femur whistle, Slovenia. All right, so here we have a critical review of the discussion about that particular instrument, and we do have access to this from a reputable journal, so let's open that up and see what we've got. So there's our bone. I mean, that does look like someone drilled those holes, but we'll actually have to read the paper to find out. That is the full paper, so let's go ahead and make ourselves a source note for this particular paper. So we'll hit go to Cite, BibTeX, and there's all of our information. But we're going to copy this. New note. Make that a source note. There's our BibTeX, and we want to name the file. And we'll say here, discussion of the oldest potential bone whistle found to date. All right. So let's see what we have. So this was found in Slovenia. Divided the opinion of experts between those who advocate the explanation that the find is a musical instrument made by a Neanderthal and those who deny it. So hopefully we'll be able to answer that question. So it looks like it was found in a dig that's been going on for a while. People have been digging this site between 1979 and 1999. So this is 20 years of excavations. In Slovenia. So it looks like this was a 2-year-old cave bear cub leg bone that resembled a bone flute. It's actually a fairly small fragment. If this is 2 centimeters, that doesn't give us a lot to work for, but it was found in the immediate vicinity of a Neanderthal hearth. So the excavation leader proposed 2 possible explanations soon after the discovery. One is a gnawed and teeth-pierced femur. Let's see. The first it could be the oldest musical instrument. The main surprise was not the great age, but its undeniable attribution to Mousterian culture, i.e. Neanderthals. All right, so the key surprising thing here is not as old, not the age. The age is surprising, but the most surprising thing is that this is Neanderthals. Back in the day, people used to think that Neanderthals were very primitive cave people, if we want to say it. So they're living in caves, grunting at each other. The idea that they had complex culture was somewhat considered laughable at the time. And around this time, we're starting to realize that they had very complex culture. So let's get some notes here. We have the age of the instrument. The artifact is a section of the femur of a cave bear cub with holes that looks like it could be a whistle. Dated to 50,000 to 60,000 years old. And I should make a note, they mentioned that it was originally misdated to 45,000 years. $45,000 years. And we want to say this is clearly associated with Neanderthals. And they mentioned Mousterian culture. I have no idea what that is, but we'll have to look into that. So this would be 10 to 20,000 years before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. That's kind of cool. So 10,000 to 20,000 years before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. All right. So we're looking here at potential explanations of carnivores. I am seeing a photo here that I'm going to enlarge. So it looks to me very much, and I'm going to have to read this, as if they modeled a carnivore jaw out of bronze and put it in a hydraulic press to see what the holes it leaves behind would look like. Let's see if that's actually what they did, but that is what this looks like to me. Oh, here we go. Experimental piercing of a fresh femur of a young brown bear using a bronze model of hyena's dentitions, and some machine for measuring compressive force. So yes, that's exactly what they did. They made a model carnivore jaw, in this case a hyena jaw. I don't know where you find the fresh femur of a young brown bear, but I guess they had one. And they tested to see if it made similar holes. So let's see. So people disagreed. Let's make a note of that. People disagreed. That's the whole point of this paper. Alternative explanation is that the holes were made by a carnivore chewing on the bone. So either humans made the holes or something chewed on it. So Turk and colleagues performed a published series of experiments perforating fresh brown bear femur bones using models of wolf, hyena, and bear dentitions, as well as replicas of Paleolithic tools that were present at the various levels at that site. And then they did musical tests as well. So let's see what they found. So I'm guessing that this particular author has a bias here because it says they presented certain erroneous claims to support their explanation about the number of holes, contra how the holes cannot be made in any. Wish I could turn off mouse overs here. Anywhere other than drilling, and counterpoints, and the placement of holes on the thinnest parts of the cortical bone, and counterpoints. So it looks like an enormous number of publications have covered this particular specimen. So let's see, what have we got? I would like to find the evidence. All right. Okay. This does not give us evidence. Okay, so it says it is significantly different from the continuous rectilinear in-depth crack that occurred on fresh bones during experimental piercing with metal models of carnivore dentition. Since the femur diaphysis is not cracked in this way, solely worn teeth or blunt-pointed tools can be considered to have produced the holes. I I might take issue with this metal model idea, right? Hyenas aren't typically made out of bronze. So we'll have to see if that is a valid method or not. Just off the bat, it sounds weird. Maybe they have a good reason for it, but we'd have to read the paper to be sure. So we can make a comment here saying holes in the artifact do not match those produced by bronze models of carnivore jaws. The authors claim this suggests that the holes were made by worn teeth or drilling. Measures forces from our experience with the models of various dentitions reveal that piercing with canine teeth takes 1 time greater force than piercing with molars and 2 times greater force if the tip of the canine tooth is blunt. So it's saying that the amount of force necessary is possible for very large carnivores, but it's probably not a small scavenger that did this. We can make a note here. The forces required rule out small scavengers. So they tried a bunch of different predators. They tried cave hyenas. Let's see, wolf, cave bear. Apparently, there's several thousand individuals of cave bears represented in this site. This claim it's not possible to make a partial hole and a complete hole, one beneath the other, and simultaneously, and emphasize depression right by hole number 3. So these are the various holes they made in their experiments. Are A, B, C, D is one that was drilled, and then for comparison, E and F are 2 of the holes in the artifact. And I mean, just to me, it looks like the shape of these holes is more like what was drilled than what came out of their tooth models, but I'm not sure. So they found a lot of scavenger or carnivore damaged bones at the site. Let's make a note there. The dig site had lots of carnivore damaged bones. So that suggests that maybe this one is also carnivore damage, right? It's not like that would be very unusual to find. And now they want to look at anthropic origins of the holes. They say one thing you can do is use a pointed tool and hammer the tool to make holes. And they said the bone does not crack when you do that. And the hole looks very similar to the one on the artifact. And you don't always see tool marks. So I guess one of the arguments against Neanderthals making the holes in the whistle was the lack of tool marks, but you don't always find those. So they found pointed stone tools there at the same site, and you can create very similar looking holes with those tools. So at the site, they found pointed tools and demonstrated that these tools can be used to create holes like the one found in the artifact. Oh, and here we have examples. We have stone tools, pointed stone tools, and then we have bone punches as well. Not sure. So that's also an artifact that they found, and if you hammer those into the bone, they also create very similar similar holes. We should make a note of that. It wasn't just stone, it could also have been a bone tool that created the marks. Pointed stone and bone tools. Either of these tools can be used. Okay. So it doesn't prove that humans made it, but at least we can't rule it out based on any arguments regarding the tools. So it sounds like humans have a lot more flexibility as to where they put the holes. So the holes that are hard to explain by the predator hypothesis can be explained by humans using tools. And apparently there's 2 parallel microscores, so little scratches on the surface of the bone, which could be cut marks made by stone tools. Oh, right there, yeah, so very, very small. This is in large view, so maybe a tool slipped and created a little scratch on the surface. Let's see. And they're saying that carnivore teeth are not capable of making those kind of scratches. They make differently shaped scratch marks. So there are potential tool marks on the artifact. That cannot be explained by carnivore teeth. And here's a reconstruction. So they used white plaster here to reconstruct the parts that are missing from the specimen. So the argument is that there is 1 hole on the bottom and 3 holes on the top. we have a mouthpiece. The cutting edge is the edge you blow against to create the sound. They're saying that the left femur would potentially be handier for a right-handed musician, while the right femur would be better for a left-handed player. All contemporary music genres can be played on the thus reconstructed musical instruments. So someone got pretty good at playing this. They got a professional musician to play on this particular reconstruction. A reconstructed version was able to play a wide range of music. All right. Currently, this unique find fulfills all conditions on the basis that it can be defined as the oldest known musical instrument. Okay, so the authors claim that all evidence points to this being an actual musical instrument. Let's see. The authors claim that all evidence points to this being a musical instrument. What's actually interesting, and something I was wondering about, when we look at this reconstruction, the cutting edge is actually present on the specimen. That is this piece of bone. So it's not like they had to reconstruct the cutting edge to make this work. The actual part that makes the sound is there. They had to reconstruct a part of the mouthpiece, and they had to construct part of the bell. But other than that, this is essentially, it's got the components, it's got the holes. It has at least a partial hole here, partial hole at the bottom, excuse me, and a cutting edge present. And it plays music if you play the reconstructed device. So I am inclined to agree with the authors here. Having no access whatsoever to the data and having very little knowledge of historical musical instruments, the argument seems clear. I'm sure based on what I'm reading here, there are tons and tons of papers that suggest the alternative, which is still that this is just a bone that another cave bear chewed on, maybe. But I am willing to say that, yeah, it's very possible that this was a bone. That this is a bone. Of course it's a bone. That this was a flute or a whistle. So let's see what we can find now in terms of anatomical evidence. So we're going to go ahead and actually reopen this paper because I wanted to know what they cited for the claim that Homo erectus probably had pitch control. So we'll go back to that source. There we go. So Homo ergaster, Homo erectus. Okay, so do they cite a source here? They say studies based on fossil remains, but they don't have an in-text citation here. Now let's see, erectus. Let's search for erectus. That's the only mention of Homo erectus in this paper. Okay, so that would be the kind of claim that I really would like to see a citation on, and instead we're going to have to find it ourselves. So, Homo erectus music pitch control. Let's try that. Evolution of the physiological and neurological capacities for music. This is Cambridge Archaeological Journal. That should be potentially useful. We also have physiological evolution and emergence of musical capacities. Okay. So it sounds like we assume Homo sapiens has always been able to sing, but the earliest evidence of musical instruments, again, hasn't been found for tens of thousands of years after the origin of Homo sapiens at the earliest. Homo heidelbergensis lived much, much earlier than that. Right, so bipedalism evolved 1.75 million years ago, and we're saying a vocal apparatus similar to the modern was present in Homo heidelbergensis 400,000 to 300,000 years ago. And let's just skim through real quick and see if we've got anatomical evidence here. It looks like we do. All right, let's make a source note for this and have a look at it. So that is this one right here. We'll get our citation. Create a new note. We're going to make this a source note. Copy the title. Anatomical evidence for the ability to sing. Okay. So, what can we find about this in the paper? Let's see. So they're saying the earliest musical instruments and evidence for possible use of acoustics do not appear until 35,000 to 40,000 years ago. Of course, that bone whistle that we just discussed was quite a bit older than that, but that one is heavily debated, so maybe they're going with a safe estimate. This is more than 80,000 years after the first anatomically modern humans have appeared. So we'll make that note first. Musical instruments made, and we'll specify here by Homo sapiens, and we'll specifically exclude here those Neanderthal finds, appear 80,000 years after the evolution of anatomically modern humans. So then we have to look at the fossil record for physiology and neurology required for musical behavior. So this is an important quote, right? essentially what we're saying is we cannot have music before we have the capacity to produce music. But so that sets a boundary on the date range where music started. So we could say music is no older than this date. But it doesn't, again, tell us that we actually made music within that date range. So we've got an analysis of the fossil evidence of hominids regarding the evolution of the neurology and physiology identified as dedicated to musical ability, and some neuroscience evidence as well. Excuse me. I just got a yawn today. Let's see. We want to jump straight down to the evidence. They're going to spend some time talking about what type of structures are used for making music. That could be really interesting. All right, so here we have some evidence. Major influences on the vocal ability are the position of the larynx in the throat, the size of the oral cavity, and the size and control of the tongue, all of which are inextricably linked. We know that mammals and non-human primates in particular are capable of creating vocalizations of a limited range because the larynx is positioned at the top of the throat. So one thing that we're going to look for is the ability to control where the larynx is. So having the larynx near the top is great because you can breathe and swallow at the same time without choking. That's useful. But it limits how many different sounds you can make. Let's see. It also limits the resonance, so you can't make as many vowel sounds. So in humans, the larynx occupies a space further down the throat, which allows us to make way more vowels. However, it also means that we're much more likely to choke on our food. At birth, the larynx occupies the top of the throat in humans, as in other mammals. As the child grows up, particularly after the first year of life, the larynx descends towards its adult position. So, I mean, that would make sense. Babies don't have a wide range of vocalizations that they can make, at least not as wide as the adult range. If their anatomy doesn't allow for it, then that makes sense. So let's make a few notes here. In most mammals, the larynx is high in the throat, limiting vocal options, but allowing easy swallowing and breathing simultaneously. So if there's a significant benefit to having that larynx high up, it makes sense that we wouldn't change that pattern unless there was a benefit to being able to potentially make those vocal options. In human infants, the larynx is high up, but it descends after about a year, allowing a wider range of vowel sounds. All right. What else have we got? So it's saying if we could find out where in fossil hominids the larynx was, we could draw some conclusions about their vocalizations. And it sounds like there's a relationship between the laryngeal position and the degree of curvature on the underside of the base of the skull. So we're saying that based on that curvature, we can figure out where the larynx was, and that'll tell us what kind of sounds it makes. The position of the larynx correlates with some curvature at the base of the skull. So if we have a skull, we can reconstruct the laryngeal position and thus make predictions about vocal ability. All right, so if we look at some early hominids, we've got Paranthropus boisei and Australopithecus africanus, which are millions of years old, like 3 million years old. And they do not have that flexing, so they are probably much more similar to modern apes with a very limited vocal range. So we'll say Paranthropus boisei. How do I spell that? B-O-I-S-I-E-I. B-O-I-S-I-E-I. Yay, I got it right. And Australopithecus africanus. And I should italicize these. And what are we calling this? Basocranial flexion. Limited or no? No basocranial flexion. No basocranial flexion, suggesting vocal ability similar to modern apes. So they could make noises, they could probably communicate with sounds, but language and music in the sense that we see in modern humans would not have been possible for them. The first evidence for arching of basic cranium is displayed by Homo ergaster. So that was 1.75 million years ago. Homo ergaster had limited basic cranial flexion. And I should put a note here. 3 million years ago. And they don't say what the implications of that are, but we're going to go ahead and say 1.75 million years ago. And then they're saying archaic Homo sapiens, or Homo heidelbergensis, have a modern basic cranium. So modern basic cranium evolved 400,000 to 300,000 years ago in Homo heidelbergensis. So Leitman suggests that Homo ergaster would have been able to produce the vowel sounds found in boot, father, and feet, whereas archaic Homo sapiens would have been able to produce a full modern repertoire of vowel sounds. Let's copy this quote directly. So not only do we have some arguments about the extent of vowel production, we can actually predict which vowels different hominids would have been able to produce. And then we're looking at Neanderthals. So we found a good specimen, but they were suffering from bone-altering osteoarthritis, so that's not a great representative if you're looking at bone structures. Someone else's study used a reconstructed skull, which showed a basic cranium very similar to that of modern humans. Neanderthal basic crania are on average longer and flatter than those of modern humans and most heidelbergensis. And this is used as a basis for suggesting incomplete speech production amongst Neanderthals. And we're going to discuss some other factors here in just a little bit. So we're going to say that Homo neanderthalensis may have had, on average, less basic cranial flexion than Homo sapiens. Which has been used to argue for incomplete speech production. So Lieberman makes arguments about about neurology. This was 1989 though. Let's see if this is developed. What was the age of this source? This was 2002. So at the time of writing, this was already getting a little bit older. So let's see what we've got. Mechanisms relied on to process speech sounds were in place long before humans began to use speech. So we can't argue that Neanderthals' brains weren't good enough to process speech sounds, even if their vocal systems were unable to produce them. Let's see. Got a bunch of reconstructions of humans and primates. I would like to get a conclusion. Well, I guess we're not getting one. Despite 30 years of debate and many reinterpretations of the evidence, the precise nature of the linguistic and vocal ability of Homo neanderthalensis remains unresolved. So we're going to try to look at the difference here between chimpanzees and humans. Okay. Let's go down. Is there a conclusion section? Acknowledgements, conclusions, okay. So Homo ergaster really is the starting point. Modern vocal and perceptual versatility can be attributed to Homo heidelbergensis. From Homo ergaster onwards, the ability to plan increasingly complex rhythmic and vocal sequences developed along with the development of the larynx. All right, so it seems from this that the ability to produce singing sounds and speech probably evolved somewhere between 1.75 million years ago and 400,000 years ago. The earliest evidence for musical instruments is way more recent. So we know that at the latest, music evolved 40,000 years ago, right? That's evidence that proves that music was being made. We have whistles. There's no reason to have a whistle if music's not being made. The ability to produce music could be over 1 million years old. So we've got a range now that we can work with. I think this is a good time to call it for today. We haven't added a lot of notes. We've read a couple of sources. What we're going to do next time is review what I find in the interlibrary loan sources that I have recovered. So we'll read some of those books and see what they find. And then we're going to organize all of this information that we've collected and generate a clear answer to the question. We've got a pretty good idea of where that answer is going to go, but you never know. There may be new stuff published. Again, this paper was 2002, so this is already over 20 years old. Who knows what's been discovered since then? So we're going to read those interlibrary loan sources. We've got 1 article and 2 books that I will report to you on in the next episode. And then we will try to organize the answer to our question from there. So I know it hasn't changed much. What we've got here is a couple of new sources that we have yet to connect to the graph, right? So this is our question. Somehow these notes are going to link to this portion of the graph right here, and we're going to answer this particular question in the next episode. With that, have a wonderful evening, and I will see you all next time.